This video is part 2 of making the pants for a McCall's Country Bunny from pattern number 3760 by McCall's. And I'm going to be using, like I said, the Model 20, and you need two pattern pieces. 41, number 41, which is the pants, and number 42, which are the straps. And you cut two of each, and as I had said in the first video, I'm making this out of a pillowcase. Now I chose to put the band area of the pillowcase at the bottom. I used to have bell-bottom pants in the 70s that had fabric of some kind at the bottom. And I'm going to redo that whole look with these. Now, the directions are very simple. They're right here. And I have to pause the video for a moment because there's someone at the window. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, as I said, I'm going to recreate the whole bell-bottom idea with this band at the bottom. It will be a test for the Model 20 because there are two layers here on each end. So the bottom seam, in fact over here there are even more, I think. 1, 2, there might be more. So sewing the leg seam and hemming will have extra thicknesses, and we'll see how the Model 20 does with them. The directions are very simple. Of course, you would have bought the pattern, and to make the pants for the 20-inch bunny, which it's view C, and basically, I'll just go over it, but you know, obviously you would buy the pattern. Sewing the front and the back seams, and then turning it and sewing the leg seams. And this is the area of putting the suspenders on. That you see how they have you put them on before you fold it for the casing. And I don't usually do that, so I may do that this time. So I'm going to cut these out, and I'm going to start sewing with the Model 20. I'm going to use hot pink thread, hopefully so it shows up. Now, I've cut out the pieces that I need, and it took about half the pillowcase. So there's quite a bit of fabric left, and if you were making a shirt, that would look really cute. If you made a shirt out of the plain fabric and the pants had the border on it. So there should be enough there to also make the shirt out of the rest of the pillowcase. So now I have cut it out, like I said, and I'm going to go ahead and sew these two seams and then the leg seam. Now here's where, again, I have a little deviation from them. They have you hem this after you get the pants made. And I just think it's much easier to just hem them now and get it over with. So I am going to make a couple of changes like that as I go along. And I'm going to see, when we get to the suspenders, I'll see how they actually want you to do it. And if it's easier for me to just attach them after the casing, I'm going to do that. So I am going to do those first. I mean, the pants are almost done once you sew the front and the back seams. And when I did cut it out, I cut the notches out, and the double notch is the back. I am going to, before I go any further, sometimes, well, you're supposed to transfer all the marks. Like these two dots are where the suspenders go, I believe. And I don't always do that. Follow all the directions. If you want to do it completely correctly, follow the directions in the pattern on how they tell you to do it. I improvise sometimes, or what I'll do is bring the pattern piece back over and mark it later. It depends on the item. There are some times when you do need to mark everything, but on this I usually don't. So I'm going to go ahead and do the stitching as I said, but instead of waiting till the end to hem this, I'm going to hem it now as well. Now, I did just read over the directions in case I'm going to do something wrong. The one thing it says is that all seam allowance are 1/4 inch unless noted. Now, 1/4 inch is really the width of the right side of the presser foot. So I'm going to take the cloth guide off of here. And as I sew, I'm just going to line up that presser foot. Now this fabric is so thin that I got it under the presser foot without the presser foot being up. And this is the back center seam. And you know, you can tell that my mind isn't all here in some ways sometimes. You have to make sure you have the fabric right sides together. It's those little things that, well, there's really no excuse for it, but sometimes when I get ahead of myself, and plus on this fabric, actually, it's something you might run into because the fabric itself looks almost the same on both sides. So now, there's a pink stripe, that must be the outside. And of course, that would matter more if it were a big item, and I'm just lining this up as I'm talking. If it were a big item, and I should have realized I just needed to turn the pillowcase inside out before I did it. Not being able to use all of my machines has really thrown me for a loop. And so I am a little bit spacey about it. In fact, I was just watching some of my videos on the Brother, you know, thinking about why I had bought that one and what I was going to use it for. And I certainly hope that my ankle problem is not going to be a problem forever. Now see, wouldn't you know, this is going to give me a problem. Now, I can't imagine that's because the fabric is too thin. But that's kind of how it's acting. It's going down into the feed dogs. This is going to be like that video for the 1591 where I made every mistake you can make in the video. I actually have people thank me for that though, because they're the same mistakes that they make sometimes. So now let's start again. And sometimes it's simply the thread. Now if this gives me a problem because the fabric is light, then this will be the end of the video, and or I'll get another machine out and I'll use another machine. Yeah, this is jamming for some reason. So let me, it's making double loops at the bottom. There's nothing wrong with the machine because I was using it yesterday. There should not be any problem with this light of a fabric because of the type of machine it is. The only thing I can think of is I'm trying to start right at the beginning of the fabric. So I'm going to move in a little bit and see if it goes easier. And there you go. You see, when you get used to a big machine, or a hand crank or a treadle or anything, that's almost an inch in I had to start. So now I actually have to go back and go over that because I can't leave that inch just sitting there. But this is what I wanted to know about the Model 20, is what type of problems are there going to be like that all the time. Now there are similar things with other machines. It makes a beautiful, beautiful stitch though. My old 1891 VS2 by Singer was so picky about how you removed the fabric from the machine. So it's not only small machines that have issues like that. But I'm going to try again from the beginning because I don't really want to have to go back and redo the beginning of every seam. It's just falling right away from there. So now I'm within about 1/4 of an inch. And I know that I'm going to pick that up or close that up when I come around with the other stitching. And you can watch the other Model 20 videos to make sure that your seam or your stitching has locked. So even though we were off to a bad start, so far so good. Let's do the front seam. And I'm going to go in 1/4 of an inch. Now, technically, the reason that is happening is that the fabric was not fully on the feed dogs. They look almost as long as a full-size machine feed dogs, but I could be wrong. So that one went much better. And at the beginning, I'm within 1/4 of an inch. But you can see, you can't see it in detail, but the reason I love these machines is because they do a beautiful chain stitch. So now you simply, let me show you this way, because this is what you need to know for making adult pants as well. You sew your, this is the back seam, and the other one's the front center seam. And to sew the legs, you just open it up and fold it like that. Now, I'm showing you that because that's how you make grown-up pants. I was saying that's how you make grown-up pants as well. You need 2 pieces of fabric like that, and just the way we've just done it. You sew a front seam, a back seam, and then you open it up. And what they have you do now is sew the center leg seam like that. And what I'm going to do first is hem them. They have you do the hemming afterward, after you've fitted it to the bunny. In my case, I don't care if they're too short or too long. If I were making them for myself, I would definitely be hemming them after I made them completely. But what I'm going to do, the other thing is, I didn't read all their directions. The only thing I see at the beginning of the sewing instructions is that everything in the pattern, including the bunny, has a 1/4 inch seam allowance. A lot of times patterns will tell you to press every seam open. And when you're making a casing, this is going to be an elastic waist casing, it's always good to press the seams open, because you're going to be feeding elastic through here and you don't want to get hung up on the seam allowances. So what I'm going to do is go over to the ironing board. I'm going to press these seams open and flat. I'm going to press the bottom for hemming, and I'll hem the bottom when they're flat. I think yesterday I even did them each before I sewed the center seams. So I'm going to press this up and then sew each one. Press open the other seams and then do the center leg seam. But you can see why these are so easy and fun to make. Now, one thing I want to mention, you have enough fabric here to fit an American Girl doll, a Bitty Baby doll. This same pants pattern would fit most dolls. You have a lot of fabric there at the waist. The difference is going to be how much elastic you use. This particular pattern for the bunnies calls for 5.5 inches of elastic for the waist. If I tried to put that on a Batat or an American Girl doll, I'd have a struggle because of the way they're built. So if you do end up buying the bunny pattern, it doesn't mean you have to get rid of your other dolls, because I could take these same pants and measure around the waist area of, say, an American Girl doll, and I'd have to figure out how much elastic to use, because it has to stretch when it's on them. So 5.5 inches, I'd probably go 6.5 for an American Girl. I'd add at least an inch. For a Bitty Baby, I might even go 7, because they're so chubby. And in fact, I have not given up on the Bitty Baby Nellie B weaving jacket. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But anyway, this is basically how you can make pants for any of your dolls. And like I said, because of the amount of fabric there. So I'll go do the pressing and some stitching, and then we're on to the elastic waist casing. Now this is the bottom hem on one of the legs, and I actually have it in there wrong. Well, actually, I'm going to do it this way. I'm kind of going in the wrong direction, but this will give you an idea of how much will fit in the throat or harp space of the machine. Normally, I'd be going in the other direction with the fabric, but when you're quilting or something, sometimes you have to do it this way. And this is 4 layers of sheet fabric. Now I can feel that there is a difference, but the stitches look fine, so that's what matters. We'll just kind of shove that in there and have it go through. I had to stop for a minute there. Now you can see that even, it's either the plate or the machine is moving as I'm doing this. And so I want to check the clamp. Now this thickness, and the reason I'm doing this way, I was looking at one of the aprons I had made for the rabbits, and it's a similar amount of fabric, but it's also gathered, which like doubles the fabric all along the way. So there are 4 layers plus all those ruffles in there. And that I don't know if this machine would do, and we're going to find out at some point. But even with doing this, I felt a difference in the way the machine was going. Now I have it on the longest stitch length, and the seam it came out wonderfully. But it's, you know, see how it just seems like it's not running rough, but it's not really delicate either. Oh, here we go again, and this time it's not from That's the biggest problem I've ever come across with the Model 20, is that once you get a double loop made, or 2 loops in one stitch, you really have to start again. Yeah, and that's not a problem. And I had made quilted placemats with one of these machines already, and that had 2 or 3 layers plus batting in there. Now on that one, the end loop tail is too short to hold the stitch, and sometimes you have to check for that. So there are the hems, and now I have to do the inner leg seam. And now we're going through double that, and I'm not going to do that. So here's one little issue. And this is why I'm a little bit cranky over this whole ankle thing. Any of my full-size machines, this is 1, 2, 3, you know, 8 layers now, or 8 layers. Any of my full-size machines would go through that in a second. And I don't think this will. So I'm starting at the very edge of that. So there's 1 stitch into those 8 layers. But it means I basically have to go back and hand stitch those together at the bottom. Now I'm coming up again on a few extra layers because of the way the band is on the pillowcase. And this is going to be hard to get used to if for some reason I have to use a Model 20. It's going to be hard to get used to. As much as I love them, now I got 2 loops for the thickness of the fabric changing like that. And I'm just going to back up and do it again. I don't know if that'll work. It makes you wonder though, I mean, they sold them to do exactly what I'm doing. This is what they're meant for, light household use. And there's nothing wrong with the machine. Now, and if I were a child and somebody had given me a machine that was going to cause a problem all the time, I don't know if I'd ever continue sewing. You know, if it's that frustrating. It doesn't want to go through these layers like that. And it should not have a problem. I think the thread broke, but maybe not. So it did go through, the thread didn't break, it just didn't like it very much. Now when you get to the joining of the center seams, you want to make sure that your seam allowances are flat and open. And before you get to the bottom, when you're doing a center seam like that, make sure that you either pin or hold your bottom edges together, or else they're going to be uneven. And that goes for whether you've already hemmed them or not. Here we go again into the heavy layers. I guess if I change the tension at that point, and then change it back again, now I am going to have at least 2 other hand cranks I could use all the time. But if it gets to a point where I'm like staying with people or something because there's no apartment, or staying in a motel because this one's being renovated, there might be a difference on how heavy a machine I can actually carry around with me. It worked fine. The seam at the bottom is caught. It didn't break, even over those heavy areas it didn't like. So the only problem is at the beginning. I couldn't start at the beginning. So in this one, I'm going to go back and head in the other direction and do it that way. And it's only 5 stitches, but it didn't want to make those first 5 stitches on the coming the other way. Nope, man, that didn't. It did not want to make those first 5 stitches. So I ended up, I just took a hand needle and closed that one area by hand. Now, so there they are, inside out, and the next step is to do the suspenders and the way they do the casing. And I'm going to read the directions and see how they do it before I start it. I just want to make sure which is the front and which is the back. The double notches on the back. So I had it right the first time. So this is the back. And to make the suspenders, it's piece number 42. And you basically just fold it in half, and one end will be slanted, and sew down the open side. And now I have to turn these inside, right side out, in order to have the suspenders. Now, what the directions say is turn the pants right side out and press them, and also on outside, after I also turn these right side out and press them, on outside pin the slanted end of the shoulder straps to the back of pants between the circles, and those are the circles that were on the pattern here. So I can line the pattern back up. What I basically do is make them an equal distance away from the center seam if I don't line up the circles, but I can line up the pattern to make this, to have the circle show up. 1/4 of an inch past the fold line on pants. Now the fold line, that looks to be about an inch down. It's actually 3/4. So 3/4 of an inch past fold line on pants. So what they, after these are right side out, you really, go an inch down and put the slanted end, once this is right side out. Actually, it has to go this way because the strap has to cross in the back. So this ends up straight, and the strap itself is slanted, pointing to the right, and the other one points to the left. But you have to go an inch down, and it says to pin them there and then stitch them in place. Now that's on the outside. See, this is why I don't do that. I'm doing it backwards. Because I'm thinking then when you turn it in to make the casing, you've got the raw edge outside. But you actually do it this way. So it would be like that. And then you stitch them. And then when you turn the casing in, this would go up. I don't like it that way. What I do is make the casing, and before I put the elastic in, I place the straps on the back where they're supposed to be and stitch them in place. So either way that you find easier is the way to do it. So right now both of these need to be turned right side out, and I need to put the straps on the back. No, change of mind. This is still inside out. I'm going to fold this down on the fold line, which is 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to turn under 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to stitch that, except for the one area where I leave it open to insert the casing, the elastic itself. And I'm going to go ahead and make the casing. Then I'm going to place the shoulder straps on the right place in the back. And if I stitch them in place, then I have to make sure that they're not in the way of me inserting the elastic. At that point, I would insert the elastic, turn the pants right side out, and you have to bring the strap around to the front. So sewing the strap to the front through the casing with the elastic already in there and it all bunched up is going to be a little tricky even on a big machine. So let me go ahead and do it my way. I'm gonna I'm just going to go ahead and make the casing. And I usually leave an inch on either side of the center back seam to, in other words, I'll start stitching here, go around, and I'll end here, and I leave so like a 2-inch area open in the back to insert the elastic. Now I've got the casing for the elastic done, and this is actually the back. And to mark where the strap should go, I can just place the pattern like that, because if you remember how we started, this would actually wrap around to the front. So I can now use just chalk, regular chalkboard chalk, and put a mark there, and then flip this over and do the same thing on this side and put a mark there. And that's where the suspenders should be in the back, or the straps. At that point I attach them, but as I said, I have to line the stitching up with this stitching so that they're not interfering with the casing. So I still haven't turned them right side out. This is the back, and this one has to go like this. So that's how I do it. The way they did it was like that, and then when you actually make this casing, it comes, you know, I think I just think backwards from some patterns. So what I'm going to do is pin it there and stitch it right across there, and do the same thing with the other one on the other side. Then I'll put the elastic in the casing, and the straps should be where they're supposed to be. Now, something I want to mention here, I'm turning the straps right side out. If you notice when you read a commercial pattern, some of them might, but most of them that I've ever seen don't mention that you'll be sewing this by machine. They, for example, I was just reading ahead on how they actually state how to attach the front of the straps, and what I did yesterday, I made the other pair with the 1588, and I just pulled the elastic, the waistband apart a little bit, and I stitched them with machine. But the way they say it here is, you know, they tell you how to lap the front edges of the pants over the straps and sew in place. See, they say sew in place, and it just brings to mind that even though my grandmother had her 9913, what she did most was hand sewing. Now, she didn't make any of her dolls or bunnies or anything herself, but when she did sew, she mostly did it by hand, and then would use the machine if there was something she couldn't do by hand. Everything I've been talking about this morning with the Model 20 and sewing this pair of pants could be done by hand. And depending on how much of a frustration the machine is, possibly faster. So that's something to think about, because it makes your pattern pieces more valuable than your machine. As long as you have your pattern pieces and a needle and thread, you can still make everything. And that's a reminder I have to think about. In my stuff here that I have kind of still piled out here to take with me are 2 big bins of sewing patterns. And about 1/3 of them, or no, maybe 1/4 of them, are for crafts like quilts and toys and dolls and stuff like that. And the rest of them are clothes. So, I mean, the art of hand sewing is still an art, and it's something to think about. And in that case, all you ever need to take with you is a big wonderful box of thread and fabric. So These sometimes get frustrating, the tubes, to turn them right side out. You can use a pencil or a knitting needle or something to push them through. These are wide enough where I can actually do it with my hands. Just pull it out. Now I've gone ahead and stitched the shoulder straps in place right over my previous stitching line right there. So as you can see, they're on there now. And this is a way that I found is an easy way to put elastic through casing. I pin one end near the opening, and I put a large safety pin through the other end. And that way I can stick the safety pin into the actual casing and move it through the casing very quickly. Then when I get all the way around and I have the other end coming out here, I pull the two of them up together, this end and the end coming out, and stitch them together. Now I'm not going to trust that with a chain stitch. First of all, I guess I will see if the Model 20 will go through it, but I would rather just take a needle and thread and stitch those together very quickly, because the next step is to then close the opening to the casing. So you don't want your elastic to come apart once you've closed that opening. So I may not try it with the Model 20. I think I'll just get the elastic through the casing and hand stitch the two ends together and then close the casing. Now all of this I'm doing with them on the pants on the wrong side. As soon as I'm done with that, I will turn them right side out, put them on a rabbet, and then place the front of the straps. Now there is the elastic coming out, the one on the safety pin, and obviously pinning the other end there keeps it from whipping through and following you around, but that is how small the opening becomes. Now the pattern calls for a 1/4 inch elastic, which is what I used yesterday, but my casing is big enough where I also have 3/8 of an inch. So that's what I've used, and it fills the casing a little more. It doesn't really make a difference, but that's a very tiny waist. So now, as I said, I will just stitch the two ends together and then close that casing, and we'll see how 5.5 inches goes on a bunny. Now here they are on one of the rabbets. These are the extra rabbets I have, and they have clothes. Now these shoulder straps came out a little bit shorter than the ones that I made yesterday, and I'm not sure why. Maybe I just cut them a little short. A very simple project to do, but this type of project, even though the Model 20 handled it, I'm now going to be worried that the chain stitching is going to come out, that I didn't catch a seam. You know, the lock stitch machines, you know that your seam is not going to come out. So these are only placed there right now, and I'll probably hand sew them. As you can see, all the rabbits tend to come out just slightly differently. They all have their own personalities. And when, you know, if you make one, obviously, then that's the rabbit you have. When you have more than one, this one is just shaped a little bit differently. The pants might fit it differently. This one is wider. This one was very wide. But they're cute pants. So now, and especially if I had made a shirt out of the same fabric, this rabbit would be dressed. And that's what I'm saying is, when I make these, I want to make them so that if a child were to pick it up, they wouldn't have to worry that the clothes would come apart. So, as much as I like the Model 20s, even with a simple project, I think I always would lean toward a lock stitch machine. But this has been a good way to do this and to see, you know, I also have my Spartan. It's had a motor on it, and I could carry that a lot easier than the 1588 or my grandmother's machine in the case. So luckily I have a few options, and I hope you haven't minded my babbling and my test on how the Model 20 did with a pair of pants for a bunny. Now, I haven't ruled out a Model 20 completely, but I can't also say that I won't put that same thread in one of the lock stitch hand cranks and go over a few things. Now, the other thing is, and this is just luck, I had made the jacket black for blue. It'll also match the pants on this rabbit. So we have started a wardrobe already, and we have rabbits to dress. So, you know, the frustrating part is spending years and years and years of making sure everything is so tight you can throw it in the wash and never a stitch will come out. And then going from that to thinking about going to a chain stitch, where when I closed the casing in the back, the end loop thread was not long enough. I couldn't pull it out though. So it does hold. It's just a change of thinking from a big, heavy, full-size machine to a small machine and a different way of sewing. Now, anywhere that I want to reinforce this, I can do it by hand, and that's what I had started to mention. I had shown you the bobbin boxes I have by Dritz, and I have wound bobbins for, I have two of these for a 15, two for a 66, or a 99. They're class 66 bobbins. I also have two that have all my hand quilting thread on bobbins. And I can work from bobbins or spools. And then I have a needle book and a small sewing kit. And all of this hand stuff here fits into this small sewing box. This is also by, I think it is Wilton that makes cakes. And this is called their junior box. And it is small, but it holds all of that for hand sewing. So really, the way my grandmother was thinking was that you did it by hand unless you needed a machine. So the majority of this I have done by machine. I could very easily do the reinforcing by hand, and I would only have to carry a Model 20 and a small hand sewing box. So I have not ruled it out, and I have not ruled out any of my machines being converted to a hand crank if they're able to. So we'll see where the Model 20 heads next. The sewing boxes are actually called, they're by Wilson, and they're called Will Hold, W-I-L dash Hold, H-O-L-D, Wilson Manufacturing Corp., Sunbury, Pennsylvania, USA. Now, I've only seen this one junior box that I have, and I had grabbed it. I have another full-size by the same company that holds everything. So those are available. I've seen them on eBay and Etsy. They usually go by Will Hold, and they're made by Wilson, not Wilton.